Mr. Cox, you've been on a needs assessment mission now. At the end of last year, beginning of this year, 6 trips to Ukraine. Why was this necessary?
This arises in a context where the European Parliament had one of its classic observation missions to the last legislative elections in October 2014 in Ukraine, where Mr. Andrei Plenković, who is the one responsible in the Parliament for this area, made a recommendation that they shouldn't just walk away, that they need to do some more work with the new Parliament. This matured eventually into a memorandum of understanding signed by President Schulz on behalf of European Parliament and Speaker Groisman on behalf of the Verkhovna Rada in Ukraine on July 3rd.
And basically, you have come up with a sort of report with 52 recommendations. One of the recommendations that's quite interesting is because most of us think of Vokhavna Rada as quite a chaotic place. And you have suggested that they adopt a sort of code of conduct where you can suspend MPs, where you can fine them, and where you can really name and shame people who are misbehaving. Do you think that can stop the sort of image we have of this chaotic shenanigans going on in Kiev?
We have 7 areas that we've identified as levers of transformation, and we have several recommendations under each lever of transformation, of which the last one indeed is about ethics and code of conduct. In the period of our mission, we saw, as was seen on television across the world, some of those uglier incidents that took place on the floor of the Parliament. And we were surprised to discover, unlike most parliaments, that there was actually no power in the existing rule book to deal in any suspensive way or with any fine or any imposition whatsoever on deputies who engaged in that kind of activity. So we've recommended that that should be dealt with immediately. Also that they should consider to establish a system of parliamentary ushers. Such a system does not exist, and they are not a police force, but if an usher approaches a member in such a circumstance, in all systems where parliamentarianism is an established culture, a member would then withdraw from the chamber and not continue with the incident.
Some of the other things you have suggested are quite sort of technical things, but possibly quite important. Mixed committees, for example, cross-party caucuses, a reduction of numbers of committees in the Verkhovna Rada. Can you explain a bit why would this make a difference? Why would the Verkhovna Rada function better?
Well, we sat down on arrival to meet people and to listen. And I would say, if I could describe the mission, it was rather like a big sponge soaking up everything that was told to us. We didn't arrive like Moses with tablets of stone saying, this is what you should do. So the things that are in it that may appear to you to be technical are the kinds of things that people spoke to us about that create operating difficulties within Verkhovna Rada. So to take an example of actions that we recommend, the Verkhovna Rada has a right for each deputy to initiate legislation. This is a right that many parliaments have. What is unusual in the Verkhovna Rada, that if you look at all the legislation that has been tabled before the Parliament since the last election, of which there are about 2,500 proposed pieces of legislation, fully 2,000 of those were from members' initiatives. The committees, the legal drafters in the Parliament, the processing of this is drowning under this tsunami of initiatives. So we're trying to find a way to respect the right of initiative, but to channel it. So that's an example.
You have lots of experience when it comes to parliaments, Irish Parliament, European Parliament for a very long time. And you said before that, we're not coming here as Moses with tablets. But let's say that, you are an old parliamentarian. Come with 3 tablets as Moses and say, please implement these 3 things. What would it be?
I would say, if I was to locate an answer to your question, one of the key things is to do with improving process and procedure. If you get good procedures and good process, you can do a lot more in terms of high quality legislation. It's a rather general way, but it summarizes one package of thought. The second is to radically modernize the administration. The administration of the Parliament has a lot of the legacy effect of the earlier Soviet era. Even its name, it is the apparat, and the ones in it would then be the apparatchik. And it's a system, the older style of management in that era was command and control. The boss tells you what to do, and then you don't exercise any discretion. Modern systems devolve power down to different operational units, give people budgetary and managerial discretion, and hold them to account for delivery. So a whole restructuring there, including investing in retraining and modernising staff skills. The Verkhovna Rada today has a budget of about €2.50 per annum per person for training. If you were doing a significant training programme, that wouldn't pay for the coffee breaks. So, I mean, it's simply not realistic. More needs to be done there. And a third element, so we've the legislative process in one, the second pillar, I would say, is the administrative one, and the third one is relations with citizens. And here we have a suggestion to develop a medium-term e-parliament strategy, the budgets, the skills and the capacity to use modern technology to open the parliament to Ukrainian society right on the leading edge. There's very good reports available, and we reference those in terms of best-in-class international practice. And since they're thinking of transformation, why not skip dead generations of old practice and arrive right at the leading edge of the best e-parliamentary practice?
Now, this is not a binding report. The Vokhavna Rada don't need to take account of it or anything like that. Do you really think that they will care about this report or your recommendations?
So I'm very conscious, we're not naive, that they have lots of rules in Verkhovna Rada today, some very good ones, that they in practice have chosen to ignore under the various pressures they operate under. We're conscious of that. What I can tell you is that I have never been to a parliament where so many senior people opened up in such a refreshing way to third parties to tell what they saw as the needs of and the deficiencies in their current system. And that's a very good start. A self-consciousness of the need to change is already established. I believe that as long as the faction leaders in the parliament are very clear that they will work together as what I'm calling, again in the preface, Team Ukraine, that the people's deputies will engage in developing a major institution at the heart of democracy in the state as a common project, even though they may contest all the politics.
You mentioned Ukraine's future. Few Western politicians have travelled as much to Ukraine as you have in the last 5 years. What do you think about Ukraine's future when you were there now? You have quite a good span now from 2010 to 15, 16. Where are they heading?
Well, firstly, it's a system under staggering pressure. Could you imagine in any parliament, so you know, I say this of any parliament anywhere, that you're dealing with a country, part of whose sovereignty has been challenged by a large neighbour through the annexation, in this case of Crimea, part of the territory, part of whose territory has been engaged in a separatist war assisted by an external power, that simultaneously, related to this, has a major macroeconomic crisis and an unemployment crisis, a budgetary crisis, that has huge internal debate about how to constitutionally recognise the changes happening within their state and how to devolve power. These would be sensitive anywhere. Now, load them all in at the same time, and any political system, no matter how good it was, would find itself labouring under strain. So the first thing I would say to people is you need to respect, when you stand back and reflect on it, that these are people working under the most extraordinary, challenging and difficult circumstances. Number two, I would say the level of reform that has happened in the 2 years since Maidan is more than happened in the 23 or 24 years before Maidan. This doesn't mean that it's gone far enough, but we have to give credit where it is due as to how far it has travelled since Maidan. But the pressures, the expectations of the revolution of dignity set the bar very high. And so I would say the aspiration of the society is yet not fulfilled in the delivery by the politicians. And where you have a gap between aspiration and delivery, you risk to have a credibility gap. So the time is not endless, the patience is not endless, and Ukraine really needs urgently to act. One of the key actors is the Parliament. And for so long as the Parliament is less than properly efficient and effective in fulfilling its mandate and role, you're contributing one key weakness at the very heartbeat of democracy, which is why this report makes sense.
May I ask you a final question? Has the EU lost focus on Ukraine with all the other things going around in Europe at the moment? I think of Brexit, migration crisis, Syria.
Has it lost focus? I would say the answer to the question is no. But I do think, and there's no point to deny it, that when you look at the weight of the issues confronting the EU itself today, that it was Jean Monnet who remarked, l'Europe se fera par ses crises, that Europe would be made by her crises. But I don't think he was thinking of multiple existential crises at the same time. And there is a risk that the political capital of Europe's leaders at member state level and of Europe's institutions is so spent and so stretched, because all capital is limited and its elasticity stretches only so far, that Europe itself is facing an extremely challenging and difficult moment, and necessarily is spending its capital on, is consuming a lot of capital on trying to cope with these crises. And for that reason, it's inevitable that various other things take a place in the queue. And whereas Ukraine was perhaps number one in the queue at a certain moment, that part has slipped back. But for those who are charged with responsibility, so the behind-the-scenes thing that isn't in the news headlines every day, there is quiet and effective work and engagement going on. It's just that the media focus and the political focus has certainly shifted ground. But behind it, like this work, from the beginning of this exercise until today, I have given no media interviews, and this has been months and months of very detailed work. I'm not saying, is this what the whole Ukraine EU engagement is? Certainly not. But it's an example of things not necessarily known, not necessarily publicised, but very real. And lots of very real things are happening. They're just not in the headlines.
Mr. Cook, thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.